So I'm switching to English so you know everything we're talking about, including things we're talking about you. My name is Cristian Lupșa, and I also called The Power of Following storytelling. Tonight to find out. There's some information that we're gonna take and the reading or speak to him directly. He's gonna be here signing books. So you can come talk to Will directly, which is why we'll keep the question and answer. We'll just keep this discussion to a maximum of an hour. We are here because of Publica, Editura Publica, which is Will Storr's publisher in Romania, and people that are great friends to any kind of nonfiction, and we're grateful to them for publishing Will. And Will is in Romania also thanks to Forvis Mazars, a financial services company who also believes in the power of stories, and they made Will's trip possible. So we are happy to have him here tonight. I'm going to introduce Will a little bit, and then we're going to get into the conversation. So Will Storr has spent most of the last decade exploring the origins and importance of stories and the power they have over us as individuals, but also as groups or recently even as businesses. He's the author of 6 widely acclaimed books, including Selfie, which was also translated into Romanian, and The Status Game. And he also works with high-profile figures as a ghostwriter and story consultant. So if you want to know what that is all about, you can talk to Will about that. Will's background is as a journalist, and he has written for The Guardian, The Sunday Times, The New Yorker, The New York Times, and many others. And we are here tonight to talk explicitly about these 2 books, which are The Science of Storytelling and his latest, which is we're launching tonight here in Bucharest, which is A Story is a Deal, How to Use the Science of Storytelling to Lead, Motivate, and Persuade. Welcome, Will.
Thanks, Christian. Thanks for that introduction.
I want to start with what seems to be, at least from my reading, your main argument in both of these books, and the thing you're really trying to get us to understand. And I'll quote from the most recent one, and you say, "Story is what we do, story is who we are, story is human life itself." What do you mean by that?
Well, so I'm talking about the fact that we are, we've evolved to be a storytelling animal. Our brains remix all the chaos and confusion of reality and turn it into a story with beginnings and middles and ends, and puts us as the hero in the middle of this sort of great plot. So we're the only animal that experiences life, in this way. So it's story. Story is not something that was invented by William Shakespeare or anyone like that. Story is what the human brain has evolved to do, and what good storytellers do is, by instinct usually, mimic some of the ways the brain is turning our lives into compelling stories.
So your interest is not in the story as a product, or how maybe most of us think of it as something, as a book you read or a movie you watch. You're thinking of story as something that we are, and that we
exactly
we do.
We are a character in a story. That's what we are, and if we're living a life that has meaning and purpose and that is pleasing to us in the main, we're living what you might term a kind of heroic story. And I don't mean that we're like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, but it means that we've got these missions that we're pursuing. We've got these various projects that we're pursuing, and that we've got obstacles that we're overcoming, and we're generally successful at overcoming those obstacles. When you think about a Christian, a Christian who really believes in the Christian story of what a Christian should be. That story of Christianity is what gives their lives meaning and purpose and direction. It's a code for behavior. If I follow the Ten Commandments, I'm a good person, I'm a heroic person. So without story, we are just, meaningless animals. So it's the story, that gives our lives that meaning.
So as you said, the idea of telling stories or stories is not an invention by Shakespeare, but it's also, for those of us who do write or do work in story, it's also not a marketing invention from the past 20 years. You're saying that we are in a way wired for them. And I know you wrote a lot about that. So can you say more about how we are wired for
okay.
story?
To kind of tell the story of the evolution of life very briefly, if you were to trace your family tree back about 3.8 billion years, you'll find at the root of your family tree a single-celled bacteria. Like that's our collective ancestor, and for hundreds of millions, billions of years, that was life on Earth with these single-celled bacteria, and they're surprisingly complex creatures. So, like all living things, they're interested in overcoming the obstacles of survival, to pursue the goal of survival. And they do it with kind of what you might think of as algorithmic rules. So if the conditions outside my cell wall are X, I'm going to do Y. And so that's how they work. And that was very successful for a long time. But the problem with that is that if you're algorithmic, that's not very good at dealing with situations that are uncertain or surprising, and of course, because you have no flexibility. So what do you do? Like, how does evolution solve that problem? And it solves that problem with the invention of emotions and feelings. So that's the next great advance in evolution, the feeling system. And feelings are really smart because they allow us to overcome obstacles in pursuit of goals in ways that don't instruct us. They advise us. So feelings are there to advise us rather than to tell us what to do. So if you imagine that you're a cat and someone's just dropped half a burger down an alleyway and you're hungry, you feel the feeling of hunger. But it's not telling you to do anything, but it's saying, go on, get the burger. And then up on their roof there's a rat, and the rat's looking at you, and now you're like, oh no, I'm going to, I'm scared of that rat, whatever. And so now you've got two feelings in you, and they're competing. I've got fear and I've got hunger, and I get to decide now what I'm going to do. So that's really good. That solves the problem of dealing with chaos and uncertainty. So that's a fantastic invention. And then the next thing that happened between 50 and 100,000 years ago was story. And story is the latest invention by evolution so living things can overcome obstacles in pursuit of goals. And story is incredible for two main reasons. The first main reason is that it enables us to store information about overcoming obstacles in pursuit of goals. So, before we could write, there was the oral tradition. And so, so that's amazing. And share information. I mean, no other creature can really, in any profound way, share information about the overcoming obstacles in pursuit of goals. Obviously, animals teach their young things, basic lessons, but not nowhere near to the extent that we can. So that's the first one. But the second thing, which is at least as consequential, is the fact that story allows us to work together in cooperative groups. And so, human beings are a species of great ape. We're not like an ape or evolved from apes. We are an ape. But obviously we're very different from chimpanzees and bonobos and the great apes. And the difference is that we are highly communal. We are highly cooperative. Rather than solving the problems of existence as individuals, we solve the problems of existence in the form of cooperative groups, a bit like ants. So we're kind of part ape, part ant. And so how do you do that? How do you get all these individualistic ape brains working together like ants? So everybody sort of is in the group, knows their role, knows what they should be doing, and they work together like ants in an ant's nest work together. Well, you do it with story. That's what story does. Story is an account of often account of the future. If we do this, we work together. It enables us to share goals, share strategies for achieving those goals, and that's what story does. It kind of unites individual brains together and gets them thinking as one. And you can see this if you go to the theatre or the cinema. You know, people go to the theatre or the cinema as individuals, and then if the story's any good,
They come out as a group.
yeah, they come out as a group. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm really glad you went through this quick history, because I think if you're looking for writing advice or tips how to craft a better story, they do exist in Will's
Yeah.
book too.
Yeah.
That's part of it. But I think what Will does so well is tell us about sort of the importance that story has to our actual livelihood and how we're using this information. Knowing that I'm going to talk to you today, I finally found an excuse to use this quote by writer Rebecca Solnit, and she's talking about fairy tales here, and you might be familiar with this quote, and I think it mirrors a lot of what you said. And she writes, "Fairy tales are about trouble, about getting into and out of it, and trouble seems to be a necessary stage on the route to becoming." Yeah. And then she goes on to say, "All the magic and glass mountains and pearls the size of houses and princes beautiful as the day and talking birds and part-time serpents are distractions from the core of most of the stories, the struggle to survive against adversaries, to find a place in the world and to come into your own."
Yes, exactly. So you know, we were talking about how all these, you know, reflexive technology, emotion technology, story technology, it's all about how to overcome obstacles in pursuit of goals. And that's why, you know, that's one of the most sort of fundamental rules of storytelling, really. A story, like the core definition of a story for me, is it's a unit of information that describes the overcoming of obstacles in pursuit of goals. Like, without somebody wanting something and something standing in their way of getting that thing, you haven't got a story. You've got something else, but it's not a story. So, and that's why. I mean, that's what one of the sort of big revelations for me writing this book was understanding. That's why story is about problems and obstacles, because that's what it's there. That's what it evolved to do, was to get us to solve problems as a group.
So what you're telling us is that consciously or unconsciously we'll go home tonight, and over the weekend we might pick up a book or watch a movie, and part of what we're doing is looking at other people to see how they've solved obstacles.
Yeah, exactly. And fundamentally in stories, like people want three things, right, in all stories. And the first thing they want is to survive. You know, that's what we want to do. That's what all living things want to do. So if you watch a movie like The Revenant, that's about survival. It's about a man being chased by a bear. He's got to survive. It's pretty basic. But there are two other things, because we're communal, we're cooperative, that we want as humans, and that story trains us to do. And the first is connection. You know, we are profoundly motivated to connect with other human beings, whether that's in the form of a group or a romantic relationship or a friendship group or whatever. So lots of stories. You know, Stand By Me is about friendship. Brokeback Mountain is about romantic love. You know, so lots of stories about how do I achieve connection. And then the third thing is status. So status is the reward for serving the group in some way. And when you serve the human group in some way, people admire you, and your reward is status. So heroes also have status. So, you know, a film like, I don't know, Whiplash, for example, is about status, about a guy learning to be an amazing jazz drummer. And if you think about some of the best stories that have ever been told, the kind of stories that we can watch over and over and over again, whether it's The Godfather or Romeo and Juliet or Star Wars, they're about all three of those things at once. They're about survival and connection and status. And I think the reason why they feel so profound and they feel so rich with information is because they're about the three great human themes.
So I'm curious, and I'm sorry if this is a dumb question, but if you know so much about how story works, how have you felt this impacting your own life? So if you know the mechanism and how it works, yeah, has it impacted the way you look at your own life and your own choices, not just what you write about, but who you are? Yeah,
it has, in quite profound ways. I mean, the first thing is knowing that there are three buckets. There's survival, there's connection, and there's status. Like when I'm stressed or worried or anxious, when I'm feeling bad in any way, I just think, well, is it a survival problem? Like, is it my health bad? Is it a connection problem, or is it a status problem? And what I find is that if I'm basically okay, it's one thing. But when you get problems in 2 or more buckets, you start to get really anxious and or depressed or something. So it's a really useful model for kind of understanding your own problems. Like, where does this kind of fit? Yeah. So that's one of the ways it's changed the way I think. Yeah.
I want to bring in something to complement this question. You write about the idea of a story world.
Yeah.
That are sort of our backgrounds, our upbringing, our baggage.
Yeah.
Is all part of us telling a certain story about the world. So I'm curious, can you say more about the story world and maybe exemplify it with maybe your own life? Like, what is the story world of Will?
Yeah, okay. So, one of the ramifications of having this storytelling brain is that we live in these 2 realms at once. So on one level, we live on the survival realm, like all animals. We want to get food and shelter and water, and we want to spread our genes. We want children, so we want relationships, and we want sex and all those things. So that's the survival stuff. That's the animal stuff. But we also live in this story world where we're seeking the hero's rewards of connection and status. And that's where, assuming that we are healthy and we've got no immediate threats to our life, that's where we spend most of our time. We spend most of our time in this kind of world of heroes and villains and feuds and love and hate and challenges and obstacles. And so that's where we all live. That's the history of the world. I've been in Bucharest watching YouTube videos about the revolution and all that stuff, and then you see, what is communism? It's a story. It's a story about who we should be and what is a hero and what is a villain, and what we should do to the villains, and how we're going to achieve this glorious happy ending, which was the vision of communistic socialism. It's a story, and that's how powerful stories are. I mean, they're incredibly powerful. And when you see them, people massed out in the square, before they were having to be kind of forced there, when they really believed. I mean, that's the story. That's the power of story that they're under. So that's the story world, and that's not really about survival. That's about a lot of that is the communists wanted a world without status, didn't they? That was the dream. It was a world of pure connection, but of course it didn't work out that way, because we have human brains that, as Ceausescu completely exemplifies, perhaps, as much as anybody else has ever lived, we also want status. We want to be celebrated and admired. So yeah, all of that is story world stuff. And as I say, it's where we spend most of our conscious time.
And this also, so it applies to a level of community, but it also applies to the level of the individual.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, we all want to be the heroes in the stories of our own lives. And again, I don't mean that we all want to be Tom Cruise or whatever, but we all want to feel loved and valued. These are the things that are the most important to us. And if we feel a lack in love and a lack in value, we become very, very unhappy and perhaps even suicidal. Like it's a major. If you chronically lack connection and or status, and you feel trapped in that lack, you're at a very high risk of suffering from suicidal ideation. We're the only animal that kills itself. And that's why when you feel that your story, that's how important the story world is to us. If you feel that we're failing in it, and that we're stuck in that failure, that it's irreversible, we're in serious trouble.
So I want to touch on one more thing, because before maybe we get more specific and look at tips and tricks and ideas. Yeah. You said, so last night we were chatting, and you said you are more comfortable to expose personal moments from your own life in your writing. And you've written about depression, about not having kids, about turning 50 and feeling trapped. And you said, and you do that because it doesn't necessarily make you feel more vulnerable, but on the contrary, it makes you feel less alone and sort of part of a community. So can you talk to us more about this idea of story making us feel less alone, and then also maybe how we should think of personal storytelling in a way that it can evoke this? Yeah,
so again, going back to the evolutionary purpose of story, one of the things it does is it's there to connect us with like-minded people. I mean, this is one of the good and also bad things about humans is that we don't want to connect with just anybody. We want to connect with people like us. We want to find our tribe, and that's because we're cooperative. So there are some people we're going to cooperate with successfully, and people that we're not going to cooperate with successfully. So we're always looking for those people. And one of the powerful things that story does is it, and I think really great writers, novelists especially, and memoirists, is they open themselves up in such a way that you feel that you feel connected to them in some of your kind of sort of deepest, darkest pain. So there's a great comfort in that. There's a great comfort in realizing that you're not alone in this stuff, that other people have go through this stuff too. And it's very profound. I mean, one of my favorite novelists is Graham Greene. And Graham Greene is a depressed Englishman who was raised Catholic like me. And there's just something about, there's not even anything specific in his writing, but there's something about this kind of heaviness in the way that he writes that really moves me, because it's like, it feels like that's me, like that's a version of me on that page. So that's what I try and do, and that's why in my writing I try and expose stuff about myself, because what I'm trying to do is to reach other people who have perhaps experienced similar things, and give them comfort in the way that I've been given comfort by writers that I admire. And also, writers, teach you very profound things. Like I remember when I was a teenager and going through my first heartbreak with this girl, Katie, the passion, the love that you feel at 17, 18. And I was reading Julian Barnes, and he had a book called A History of the World in 10.5 chapters. And the half chapter of that book is called In Parenthesis, and it's about love. And and he talks about how he went to a butcher's shop, and he went to the butcher and he asked for a bull's heart, and he took the heart home and he unwrapped it, and it wasn't this perfect, beautiful kind of heart-shaped. It was this horrible, gristly, bloody lump. And he had this line, the heart isn't heart-shaped. And that's the problem. We expect love to make us happy, but it can't make us happy. And that stayed with me. I mean, I'm 50 now. That stayed with me all my life. That's such a profound lesson in love. And it really helped me, it really helped me understand something very important about romantic love, that the heart isn't heart-shaped, that it can't make you happy. And if you expect it to make you happy, you're in trouble, So I think that's the other thing that I think that great writers do, is they teach us important things.
Do you recall a moment where you, as a writer, felt that from someone who told you that they read something of yours and said,
I mean, not
or one that means something to you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't read the comments underneath, like the reviews and stuff. So partly because, there's two. I mean, most people are very nice and polite, and yeah, but then it goes to your head, and I don't like that. But then also some people are not going to be. They're going to be rude, and they're the ones that you're going to remember. So I don't. But yeah, certainly people have been in touch and said, these kinds of things. I mean, honestly, the other way this kind of helps is that I volunteer. There's an organisation in the UK called the Samaritans, which is a phone line for people in crisis. So I volunteer for them, and so I spend a few hours every week talking to people, some of them who are actively suicidal, and so a lot of this thinking has helped me with that too, and especially when you understand the importance of connection and status. And one of the things that I always do now when I'm speaking to somebody, especially who is suicidal, is you just as they're talking and again it shows you how important story is. A lot of these people phone you up. Like, you're not allowed to give advice because we're not trained. They just want to tell their story. They want someone to listen to them properly and not interrupt them as they tell their bloody story. It's really important to them. So you listen to them in that kind of active way. And then as you're listening, you're thinking of things like, what authentic things can I tell this person that's a compliment? Like you can't just compliment somebody randomly because they're not going to believe you. But how can I build this person up a little bit? And so you look for things to say to them that are kind, and not even 99% of the time, 100% of the time, it has such a powerful effect on them. They say, oh my God, no one has said anything like that about me ever, you know, like there was always like a little silence on the phone. So that's another way that these ideas have really helped me help other people, you know, in quite an important way, I hope.
I just have to ask you right now, and maybe this answer has changed for you over the years. What's your reason for writing or for telling stories?
I honestly don't know. It's something I've always wanted to do. Like, even when I was a kid, I used to make up stories to my younger siblings and tell them stories, you know. So it was something that I always kind of wanted to do. And if I was to tell you a story about why, well, I'd be making it up. It's just, I don't know. It's just something it's just the only thing I've ever really been. No, that's not true. I wanted to be a pop star as well, but I had no talent. So,
like a singer?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to be a pop star. That was my main thing, but I couldn't do that.
So I thought we would maybe take it into a more practical level right now. So you told us a bit about sort of the effects of stories and what they do and how they create connection and they fulfill our need for status. But sort of on a craft level, what makes a story work? Like, what are the elements that one should put in a story to achieve those kinds of results?
All right. So I think there are a few. I think the main one for me, like in the broadest sense, is that there's a kind of, you need to have a respect for the reader. You need to be understanding that your job as a writer isn't to make yourself look good or clever or anything like that. It's to communicate something important to the reader. That's a really important thing. And the way that you do that is by taking things like, I think, structure and editing kind of very seriously. So you know, good stories, I think they're tightly structured. You know, in the science of storytelling, I write about some great writers who, literally in their very first sentence, they're making a huge effort to kind of grab the reader. You know, and there are examples from children's books all the way up to just Jonathan Franzen, who in the very first sentence they're just trying to grab you. You know. So I think that's always the mark of a good writer, when from the first sentence or the first paragraph there, you can tell they're really working hard to draw you in, and that's a writer that cares about the reader rather than their own ego, which I think is really important. And I think another one is character. You know, like I think character is so important, and I think lots of writers privilege plot, because all the books tell you that you've got to have a good plot. I mean, most of the books, they tell you that if you like Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey or Save the Cat, you know, one is a 17 plot point thing, another one is a 22 one, where as long as you've got these steps in this order, you're going to have a bestseller or a blockbuster. Like, it's just not the case. So I think lots of writers neglect character to their cost. So I think, you know, when I'm reading a story or experiencing a story and the characters seem really interesting, then I'm kind of sitting forward in my chair. But if they seem like cut out and keep, here's a nice person, who's going to be our hero, just a nice person, I'm just like, oh, you know, it's going to be a bore, that one. Yeah.
Actually, I pulled a quote from The Science of Storytelling that I think goes to what you're saying, and you write, "Good stories are exploration of the human condition, thrilling voyages into foreign minds. They're not so much about events that take place on the surface of the drama as they are about the characters that have to battle them.
Yeah.
Those characters, when we meet them on page one, are never perfect. What arouses our curiosity about them and provides them with a dramatic battle to fight is not their achievements or their winning smiles, it's their flaws."
Yeah.
And one reason I wanted to read this back to you is because your latest book is about storytelling, but it's also about business storytelling. And although businesses and organizations, they say they tell stories, they often don't, or they don't tell stories the way you talk about them, because the flaws are usually missing. Like the businesses are perfect. If they had a bad year, if they screwed over their customers, if they did something bad, we don't talk about that. We just talk about how wonderful the next year will be. So I'm curious, what would be your best argument to a team, a business, an organization, a politician maybe, that they should take the risk of talking about the flaws if they want to have a good story?
Yeah, I think it's a bit more. It's obviously a bit more difficult in the business realm. Like like in fiction, you're talking about your deepest, darkest flaws, and you can't be a CEO talking about your personal issues like that. This is not going to be a good look. But there are ways that businesses can and I think should do it, and it's really about we've had these struggles, we've had these difficulties, and look at the ways that we've overcome them. I didn't actually write about this example in the book, but one of my favorite example is actually Domino's Pizza. Domino's Pizza, they had, I think this is 15, 20 years ago now, they were like in a terrible place. They were coming last in all taste tests in America, and everybody said their tomato sauce tasted like ketchup and the bread was like cardboard. It was a disaster. And so this new CEO came in called Patrick Doyle, and was like, oh God, what are we going to do about our shit pizza? So the first thing they did about their shit pizza was fix the pizza. Like they decided, and they told their franchisees, I'm sorry, but the cost of ingredients is going to go up quite a lot because we've got to fix the pizza. But then that's fine, you fix the product. How do you convince people to try Domino's again? And they actually showed genuine focus groups of people saying, Domino's, it's terrible, it's awful, it's rubbish, and that it was so refreshing and original to see that, and then it cuts to Patrick Doyle saying, well, we had a huge problem to fix. Everybody hated our pizza, and then of course you've got the story of them fixing the pizza, and then there's a new, and then they go around to the people in the focus group and give them, deliver them pizza, and they go, oh, it's amazing. So I think that's a really good example. They had the courage to go, yeah, we got it wrong. The product was bad. But the important thing about that, of course, is that it was an authentic story. They did actually fix the pizza. I think a lot of companies will be tempted to tell the story but not actually fix the pizza. But they actually fixed the pizza, and that's why their stock price soared. I mean, it turned the company around.
That's what I was gonna say. It sounds like what's important here is you don't just package the story. You fix the pizza. So just using the techniques of storytelling, like
it's not enough.
Let's say you have a character and you create some kind of obstacle, but in the business world or in an organization, you actually have to fix the problem to tell an authentic story.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think the thing about storytelling is it is designed to be a persuasive technology. It's how human brains understand the world. So if you want to communicate your business, you should be communicating it using story. But people aren't stupid. Like, you can persuade them to try your pizza again, but if it's no better, they're not gonna come back again. So it's not magic story. It's just how the brain works. It's not like a magic spell that is powerful, but it's not that powerful. Yeah.
You talked about story as a persuasive technology, and I think I've been in situations where people said, oh, when you tell stories and you're trying to be persuasive, the story is just the way you're trying to manipulate me.
Yeah.
So how do you understand the difference between story as a tool of persuasion, especially in, I don't know, business or politics, and manipulation? Is there a line, or are there interchangeable words depending on your goals?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I suppose the honest answer is there isn't really. I mean, persuasion and manipulation are just they're a positive and negative description of the same thing. I mean, the only line really is have you fixed the pizza? Would be the question. I mean, I guess if you've not fixed the pizza, then you could say that's manipulation. But so you could argue that the line is there. Yeah.
Story is a tool. It's a technology, and although it sounds very nice and cozy and warm, you can use it for good or you can use it for bad. Yeah,
I mean, in my previous book, The Status Game, I talked a lot about the bad. We talked about communism, I talked about Nazism. These were stories, and of course, they led to horrors. So yeah, it's like story is a powerful technology. Is incredibly persuasive, and it also can lead us to incredible evil. That's just a fact.
I wanted to ask you something about your Substack, so you write a newsletter every week, and people pay for.
Yeah.
So you're both a writer, creator, but you're also a salesman in a way. You have to sell your work as a creator. So I'm curious, how are you able to leverage what you know about stories and how persuasive they are to sell your work? And how does that feel as a writer?
Well, that's a really good question because I'm not very good at it. Yeah, like I'm not very good at it. I don't do a very good job at selling myself. That's the problem. Yeah. So I mean, with the Substack newsletter, it's a subscription essay newsletter, and I started off. It was going to be a storytelling newsletter, and I sort of started feeling a bit boxed in. So then I just made it more of a general essay kind of platform, and. I enjoy writing it, and it's fairly successful, but I'm very bad at selling it. And I think that's one of the problems with the way that the whole business of writing has gone. We talked about it, I think, a bit last night, where these days it's not enough to be a writer, you've got to be a salesperson too. And I'm just not very good at that stuff. I mean, the really successful writers, certainly in the UK, are the ones that are really amazing on social media. They're great on Twitter and TikTok and Instagram, and they feel motivated to do it, and I just can't be bothered. Like I can't even be bothered to, one of the really easy things to do is to try and get AI to help you with your headlines. Right. You say to ChatGPT, here's my essay, give me 100 headlines that will do. And it comes up, sometimes it comes up with good stuff. I can't even be bothered to do, it takes about 5 minutes and I can't even be bothered to do that. So that's how low my motivation is to sell myself. It's not very, so it's not very good, unfortunately. I'm just not very good at it.
Just because you understand how it would work, it doesn't mean that as a writer you're actually motivated to sell it.
It just feels like such a chore. So I don't do it. Yeah.
Since you mentioned AI, I heard you say last night that you believe that writers and writing might become a luxury good. Yeah. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so obviously people are very interested in AI at the moment, especially from the storytelling perspective, because one of the things that AI is doing is coming up with, he's creating things. And I had an experience when I joined Substack where I noticed that there were certain platforms that were really, really popular, like there were essays talking about the human condition and feelings that were just becoming massively viral. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I should pay attention because maybe I can learn something from these people. And then the next thing I noticed that they all sounded quite similar. So they were different platforms, but the writing style was almost identical to the point where like essay after essay after essay was beginning with the same words, which were there is a. So there is a feeling that's not quite love and not quite hate. And it was one of these ones. And I was like, that's so weird that they would all begin there is a, but okay, whatever. And then I noticed that these platforms didn't have human names. So they weren't like, Bob Smith's Substack. It was, one of them was called Milk and Cookies. Another one's like Notes from the Margin. I thought, that's odd. And then I noticed that Milk and Cookies was publishing 3 essays a week. And I thought, how are they doing so? And then as I was thinking that, I thought, oh, it's AI. Of course it is. It's AI. It's fucking AI. And then I cut and pasted some of these essays into ChatGPT, and I said, can you please assess these essays and tell me what are the likelihood that this was written by AI? And it came back and it said there is a very high probability that this was either entirely or mostly written by a large language model, and it gave me all these reasons why. And then I said to it, can you give me the exact prompt I would need to produce an essay like this? And it did. And I was just coming up with these, like literally it takes seconds to come up with these essays that were making the people who were posting them a lot of money. These people were charging for subscriptions, and the essays were really popular. And so I wrote a Substack essay about this, and I did a can you spot the real essay from the fake essay. And nobody could tell which was the real and which was the fake. So there were 2 things that were really surprising about that for me. And the first thing, of course, was that they were really popular. These essays were really genuinely popular. And I think mostly with young people, like it from going by the comments, it was quite adolescent and sort of early 20s. I think, but the other thing that shocked me was that they didn't seem to care that it was written by AI. Like, it didn't bother them. So underneath one of these Milk and Cookies essays, who I actually found out who she was. She's like a 21-year-old influencer in Dubai. She just like looked very, very. She looked very tech savvy. Let's just say that. So one of the comments was, "Oh, I've just read this, and why am I crying over my Starbucks coffee reading this?" And then somebody else had put, "You do realize this is AI, don't you?" And then she'd come back and gone, "I don't care if it's AI. I think it's amazing." And that was, I thought, fuck, like that's incredible. Like, so I think in our generation we've got this kind of snobbish attitude towards AI. We don't want to read AI. We don't want to watch movies written by AI. But I genuinely think that there's a whole generation of kids coming up that don't really care as long as it's good, as long as it's moving. I mean, it was only last week that I saw the news that already in the American Billboard music chart, there are AI songs in the top 100 music charts. So people don't care. So that's what I mean about a luxury good. I think what's going to happen is this kind of status stratification where there's going to be a certain amount of popular and literary culture, well, not literary, popular culture that is going to be AI and no one's going to really care about it. But there's still going to be a layer of people that care and that want to follow authors and have favorite authors and care very much that this was written by a human. And as I said, it's going to be a bit like a luxury good. So buying the new novel by Nausgaard or whatever is going to be like buying the Chanel handbag. It won't cost as much, unfortunately, for Nausgaard, but I think that's how it's going to be. I think AI is going to really eat up the Hollywood screenwriters who write the Tom Cruise movies, and the novelists who write the bonkbusters and all that stuff. I think it's just going to destroy those entire industries, because I think those readers, they don't really. I mean, I think people going to see a Jack Reacher movie. If AI helped write the script, I don't think they're going to care. As long as they're there for the ride, aren't they? That's my feeling.
This just came to me hearing you speak. But if storytelling is a technology and we know how it functions, then it's no surprise that it's so easy to predict and replicate. And maybe the arguments our generation would make, oh, there has to be a human being behind that who labored and worked on that story. Like, if it's good enough for some, this is not something we can stop if AI is just going to generate stories by knowing the
Well, in a way, there are
rules.
human beings behind it, because what it's doing, I mean, somebody called it a giant plagiarism machine. I mean, it's just reading a zillion stories and stealing the things it's learned from them. So in a way, it's full of ghosts, or this, human ghosts in these AI-driven stories. But I think what it does, the challenge that it poses for us humans, is that we've got to keep pushing and making our stories more original and more different and more weird and more unique. I think for me as a writer, that's one of the reasons that I kind of changed my Substack, because I wanted to sort of make it a bit stranger and a bit more literary and a bit odder. Because I think you've got to lean into all that eccentricity and all that weirdness of the individual, because then you're going in the opposite direction of AI, because AI goes towards the sum of, it's the average. It's weighing the average and giving you the average. So I think the artist should go towards the individual more. That's my feeling.
So if people here go home and go to your Substack, what's an odd number you recommend from there?
Oh, what, an odd essay? I mean, my favorite essay that I wrote there is one called "Ducklings Paddling in the Water." And my wife, who's a magazine editor, was like, and she also works for Substack, so she knows a lot about how to make Substacks work. She was like, "Why are you calling your essay that? No one's going to read the essay." But I was like, I don't care, and I do care. Obviously, I would like people to read it, but like that's just the oddness of it is what appealed to me. So I stuck with it very stubbornly. So but that's an essay that I'm particularly proud of, because I don't think it's an essay that AI wouldn't have come up with that essay, because I deliberately tried to make it as, I was going through, a kind of mini crisis about turning 50, and, I wanted to write about it, and I was thinking a lot about free will and determinism, and is there a sense in which life can be a trap? And so the title was inspired because I was on holiday with my wife, and I saw this duck going into this stream and all these ducklings paddling along after it. And they were sort of robotic, they were like little robots. And I was like, that's how I feel. I feel like a little robot just going through my life in this pre-programmed way. So that's that's an essay that I'm particularly proud of. Partly because it wasn't successful because it had a terrible, a title that was commercially terrible, but I like the title. so I will defend it.
So I just have I'll pick a few more questions, like 2, 3, so then we can leave you to signing and talking to these wonderful people. So one thing I did want us to touch on, so we talked a little bit about AI and what that generates, but I also wanted to ask you about social media and sort of the way it feeds on, like, the dark side of our status seeking is outrage in a way, because one way we gain status is we get recognized, or another way we get status is we make sure other people are not. So how have you, both as a sort of writer and as someone who understands the power of stories, look at the way we communicate on social media and the outrage we're looking to generate and the money we're making from generating outrage?
So I wrote about this in The Status Game, the previous book. And so to understand social media, you need to understand gossip. And so the current dominant view in psychology, in evolutionary psychology, is that the reason that we develop language is in order to gossip, which sounds like a weird thing to say, but it makes sense because gossip obviously is a form of storytelling. It's universal. We all do it. Children start to gossip as soon as they can put a sentence together. They start telling stories about their brothers and sisters and so and so bit mean. So we all do it. It's a fundamental part of the human condition. And what gossip does is it kind of polices our collaborative groups. It says, so when we swap gossipy stories, it's doing a couple of different things. Firstly, it's teaching us, because nobody wants to be the subject of negative gossip, because if you were the subject of negative gossip in a forager group, in a hunter-gatherer tribe, the punishments start off with social distancing and then graduate to humiliation and mockery, and then they go all the way up to execution, like you could be killed. If you were the subject of negative gossip in the hunter-gatherer group. So it's bad. You don't want to be the subject of negative gossip. But of course, if you're the subject of positive gossip, you get status, you get rewarded, if people think you're a hero, people think you're wonderful. So gossip was this kind of incentive system that enabled our groups to work, that policed our groups. And gossip works by, the negative gossip works by the emotion of moral outrage. So when you hear negative gossip about somebody, you feel morally outraged, and then in the hunter-gatherer group, that moral outrage will motivate you to go out and find the person who's done the terrible thing and punish them somehow. That's how it worked. So moral outrage is a really powerful emotion for human beings. It's very dangerous, and that's social media. Social media is basically a global tribal gossip network that's running on the power of moral outrage. And of course, what makes it even more kind of powerful is the fact that because it's on Twitter or whatever, or even a newspaper that's using gossipy clickbait, moral outrage clickbait to get you to click on their articles, is that there's no outlet for your moral outrage. You can't go and punish this person, except through cancel culture, which is why we have cancel culture, because people do try and punish the person. People's lives get destroyed, often very unfairly. And the other thing that you want to keep clicking, you want to read the next story and the next story and the next story and the next story. I mean, we have it in the UK with Prince Andrew. Like Prince Andrew is a bad man, certainly. There seems to be an unlimited thirst for to see his destruction, to the point where I think if he killed himself, people would be quite happy. Like that's the power of moral outrage. It's like, and it's all fueled with, through the media and through social media. Yeah, it's very, very dangerous.
Because now you can be part of any tribe. It's not just your little tribe. You can join any moral outrage movement that you feel like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a couple more, and one is very technical. You teach a class on storytelling, and anyone here could take your storytelling classes online. What's the storytelling tip you find yourself returning to most often when you teach people?
Oh, okay. What's the storytelling tip I most... okay, there's various different ways I can answer that, but I'll talk about fiction, because I think this is one of the most important ones, and that is that very often when people come to my classes, they're trying to write a novel, their first novel, and I'll say to them, so tell me about your novel, what happens? And they'll tell me this series of events. And then I'll just say, okay, so tell me about the character that this is all happening to. And it's very vague. And so my question is always, well, if you don't understand your character, how do you know all these things happen? You know, so you know, the point is, and I think this is sort of one of the biggest things that I try and teach in my fiction classes, is that the plot is the product of the character. So your character has to be incredibly specific, very specifically drawn, have very specific flaws, because just like in life, the way that we behave, the mistakes that we make, are very specifically a product of our own particular flaws. So I think that's the biggest mistake that people make when they come to my class, and I think that's the most transformative thing they can learn is, I need to figure out my character first. And until I've figured out my character, I can't possibly know what's going to happen in my story, because I don't know how my character is going to respond to all these situations that are going to happen next. So that's one of the biggest things. And I think that's one of the things that people appreciate from the science of storytelling, because that's really an idea that I kind of pound into them throughout the book.
The one last thing I wanted to ask you, and you write about this in your essays, it's in your books, you say that we should be careful to not trust the storyteller.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, again, because story is an incredibly persuasive technology, and stories are never true. Stories are never true. They're always simplifications. In my second book, which was called The Heretics, was about why otherwise clever people believe crazy things, and that's how I came upon this whole subject, really, because the point is they're smart. These people are really smart, but they end up believing crazy things. And so, how does that happen? And the answer is because the brain is a storyteller, and no matter how smart you are vulnerable to believing powerful stories. And so, you know, as part of that book, I went undercover with a very famous British historian of the Second World War called David Irving. Now, David Irving used to be very highly respected, and, you know, we know most of what we know about the firebombing of Dresden because of his scholarship. Oh, wow. And then David Irving decided, get this, that Hitler was a friend of the Jews. That's what he decided. So that's what he decided, and of course,
it made perfect sense to him.
It made perfect sense to him. Yeah, he believed that he knew nothing about the Holocaust, that it was all the other people around him knew about it, and if Hitler had known about the Holocaust, he'd just be horrified. So, go figure. So I went on so he became excommunicated from polite society. He lost everything pretty much to the point where because Holocaust denial, he went through a phase of Holocaust denial as well, which that was a temporary phase, to be fair to him, but he went through a phase of Holocaust denial. And he was actually in court in Austria, and he was asked to, he was questioning, I think it's the 6 million figure of Jews who died in the Holocaust. He was just saying it's not true. And he was basically looking at a prison sentence, and even under that level of pressure, he would not say something that he didn't believe, and he ended up going to prison for his beliefs. So he's a really extraordinary character, incredibly smart, he's gone on this kind of weird journey. So I went on in order to make money, he does these kind of history holidays where he goes around all these Holocaust sites and gives you the real history. And I went along with him undercover, because I had to be undercover, with a bunch of genuine Nazis, like with proper, like actual swastika tattoos, like fucking hell. But part of that chapter was in that chapter I said, you're a journalist, you know how it works. When I transcribed my interviews with David Irving, it was something like 20,000 words of interviews I'd done. The entire book of The Heretics was 100,000 words. That's like a fifth of the whole book. And I said, look, I'm picking and choosing the worst of him. Like there was a bit where he came across as really anti-Semitic, so that went in. But the other thing I learned on that trip, which I did put in the book, which I probably couldn't get away with a few years later, but I could get away with then, was that the Nazis they were really nice. Like they were like nice people. So what happened was, I interviewed David. I told him that I wanted to write a book about heretics, and he liked that idea. I didn't obviously tell him that I was going to grill him about his crazy beliefs. But in the first interview I did with him, I kind of went a bit too far and I pushed it too far. So, as a journalist, you've pushed it a bit too far, and you could tell he was like he just stopped trusting me. He kind of knew that he hadn't figured out I was a Guardian journalist, but he knew that something was up. So he basically started giving me the cold shoulder, and I started saying to all these Nazis, it's a nightmare, like I'm here to write this book, and David's not giving me any time. So, in every evening after we'd had our tour, he'd do a lecture, a bit like this, and there'd be questions after the lecture. And I found out that the Nazis had conspired amongst themselves to ask questions that would be helpful to me in order to get him. And I was like, God, that's really nice. That was such a nice thing to do. And so I just thought, when I was writing the book, I just thought, I'm going to put that in the book, because it happened, it's true. And when they told me that they were doing that, I was genuinely touched. Like, these are people who were singing Nazi songs, like they're Nazis. But also they're people. And as in the book, they're people who have made a really bad mistake. And the really amazing thing I discovered about these Nazis on this trip was on the last night of the holiday. The film Downfall? Do you know the film Downfall, the German film about the last days in the bunker? Yeah. There was going to be a screening of Downfall, and then David was going to give his alternative view of what really happened. And one of these guys couldn't go and watch Downfall because his dad was in the bunker with Hitler, and he found it too upsetting to watch the film. And it was like, bloody hell. And then it turned out that all of these guys had parents who'd served with the Nazis in the Second World War. Like, they all were the children of Nazis. And then he suddenly realized what's going on. And what's going on, I don't know David's story so well, but I think what was going on for these other guys is that they loved their mums and dads. But they'd grown up in a world in which they had been, Nazis, quite rightly, is a synonym for evil. But they couldn't allow themselves to believe that mum and dad were evil. So they're now on this sort of journey of Holocaust denial, which they're on. So that's a very long answer to your question. But that's what I mean about stories sort of never being true. I mean, that was an instance where I actually tried to say, I'm going to tell the true story about these people, because they are evil in a way, but also they're human, and they're also nice. I mean, that's the reality of most people. We're a mixture of all of it.
And this ties into the idea of the story world being constructed and our own brain sort of narrating things that are maybe true, but also interpreted in ways that can be false or self-serving. So again, thank you, Will, for everything you do and write and teach us about our propensity to sometimes do things and believe things and act in ways that just serve our narrative. And I think it's a good reminder that we should be careful about the stories we tell about ourselves and we tell about others. It's a powerful technology, but I also encourage all of you to pick up these books and read them to know how to use them for good. So, Will, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you.
And I'll just get out of the way and we'll move stuff, and Will is going to be signing books here. And, thank you.